Welcome back to the How to Thru Hike series. Last episode we talked about which trail you might want to hike, and maybe you've already decided. Maybe you've already done some shakedown hikes, and maybe you've already gone off and done a smaller trail first. Today we'll talk about how you're going to prepare for your ultimate uber long thru hike, whether that's the Appalachian Trail, Pacific Crest Trail, or any other super long trail out there. These are just preliminary things that I do every single time I'm starting to plan my own hikes. The first steps I take to eventually heading off on a long walk in the woods. So basically what I'm going to tell you in this early stage of planning your thru hike is to do a lot of research. But we'll talk about specifically what you want to research, so you're not just fumbling around on the internet looking for anything. And later on in this series, I'll have more specific videos on how to train physically and exactly things to do before you go. This is more along the lines of a first step. Mental preparation in the way of investing yourself in this journey. You could do these steps in any order, but let's start here. Who else is going to be out there? I find that it's a really nice thing to kind of follow a bunch of other people who are going to be doing the same trail that I'm doing. Not only does this give me people to look forward to run into, but if they're ahead of me, this has the added benefit of allowing me to see the trail before I get there, what type of conditions I myself am going to face in the very, very near future. Or, since you're doing this before you start, you get to see how everyone else prepares and also get to ask yourself, should I be doing what they're doing? Is there any merit to how they are preparing? And maybe I'm missing that. So, specifically following people ahead of you, you get to see whether there's a ton of snow coming up. You get to see that maybe the trail hasn't been maintained yet through that area. Is the trail flooded, or is a river crossing going to be very dangerous, and you should plan for that? So not only do I already have some friends out there in some way, I can also gather all sorts of information that may help me in my own journey. Now, this may seem silly to some, but as always, more information is always better. Similarly, I also look into past trip journals, either videos that people have posted from past years, or actual trail journals that people have written and published somewhere online. Although trail conditions can change from year to year, or even month to month and week to week, the trail itself generally stays pretty much the same. By reading past accounts, you can see mistakes that other people have made, what's gone wrong, or what's gone right for them. Places of interest, or towns that may be a really nice place to plan a zero in. Potential hazards, or things you need to account for coming up. For example, before I started the Pacific Northwest Trail, I looked up past videos to see what else was out there and see what type of things I could learn from those videos. And I even read a trail journal from 8 years ago, which followed the journey of someone else hiking the PNT. And even though it was really old, it was still extremely valuable. In some ways, the videos I watched kind of scared me as to what was going to come, but ultimately, if I'm scared in some way, it's better to plan and prepare for why I'm scared before I go, instead of getting out there and being surprised by these types of situations. The journals I read, on the other hand, were instead very reassuring, and ultimately, I was very happy that I read them. Now, some people might think that you don't want to spoil the trail for yourself before you even get out there. And I fully understand that. Before I did the Uinta Highline Trail, I didn't read or watch anything about it, and instead left all the surprises for when I was actually out there hiking it. This can work, and this can be a lot more exciting, but in the end, on that trail at least, I got slammed with a lot of conditions and hardships that, if I had done a little bit more research, a little bit more planning, and a little bit more looking into others' experiences, I would have been a lot more prepared for. So by not doing these things, you'll probably be fine. You could be fine. But ultimately, I do think by researching and planning in this way, you are increasing your chances of success. Once you're out there, all of this stuff gets exponentially harder, looking into conditions or following the people ahead of you. So it's good to have that extra familiarity with the trail before you even begin. So while I'm reading other people's journals or watching other people's videos, I try and pay attention to maybe the towns that they mention. If there's anything strange, like a really long food carry in between towns, or maybe that they needed to send themselves a box here or multiple boxes because they're passing through towns that don't even really have grocery options. So this kind of fits into the broader category of food and resupply, and we'll cover that more in depth in a later video. But for now, we'll just kind of make a mental note as we're reading these journals and we're watching these videos. Is there anything special that is kind of standing out? Anything that seems out of the ordinary, or something that seems excessively hard? That's kind of what we're looking for when we're reading these things. If it's a trail you're planning on doing that is extremely remote and you need to send yourself resupply boxes along the way, that's something you kind of need to know very early on, instead of in your last days of being home scrambling to try and put those things together. So that's kind of why we look into this stuff so early. A trail like the Appalachian Trail, you don't really need to pay too much attention to the resupply. It's all very easy out there. You really only need to know the first or second town you planned on going to. And beyond that, you'll kind of figure it out as you go. Whereas a trail like the Continental Divide Trail, or the Great Divide Trail, or the Pacific Northwest Trail, you're really going to need to look into these things before you go. So even though most trails, the food and resupply situation isn't that difficult, it's still really good to be aware of just how far it is in between towns. How much food are you going to need? How big of a backpack are you going to need to carry that food? And how long are you going to be out for, maybe without cell service? All of these things can vary wildly if the trail you're hiking is hitting a town every 60 miles, like maybe the Appalachian Trail, or if you're hiking a trail that's not going to be hitting a town except for every 200 miles. Hikes like the Appalachian Trail or the Pacific Crest Trail have wonderful resources online for this type of stuff if you just search Pacific Crest Trail towns or Pacific Crest Trail resupply. You'll find all sorts of information out there. As for other trails that maybe aren't quite as popular as those, there's probably still a guidebook out there for them, or maybe even an app on your phone where you can figure out this information. Personally, I really like planning with guidebooks in hand, and I go through and the first thing I do is I highlight every town and I try and pay attention to how far it is in between each town. So this actually brings up another great thing that you can do at this time, and that's go online and see if you can buy maps or see if you can buy a guidebook for the trail you're doing. I personally prefer the guidebook when it comes to just planning. So you'll want this stuff early on because not only is the mail slow sometimes, and the last thing you want is to be ready to go out and hike your trail and still waiting on your guidebook or maps, but also you'll want to start flipping through these things and looking at them just to gather a little bit extra familiarity with the places you're going to be going. You certainly don't have to go nuts with this. I know that I like to plan maybe a little bit more than some people, just every once in a while to look through it and maybe read a page or learn about the trail and the towns you're going to be going through. So I cannot recommend enough buying a guidebook for the trail, but also I can't recommend enough getting the app Guidebook and getting the specific trail that you're going to be hiking on it. It is truly an invaluable tool these days for navigating trails. And frankly, in the planning stages, I just use the guidebook, and then when I get on the trail, I generally just switch over to Guidebook. Guidebook has many trails loaded onto it, and it is extremely affordable for the amount of things that it gives you, the amount of information that you can get out of it, and how frequently you're going to be using it just about every single day. I do have one word of caution about Guidebook though, and that is don't get lost in it. I can't tell you how many people I see on trail who are just staring at their phone, agonizing over the climb that they're going to have to do or the distance it is to the next town and their next food stop. Instead, if they had just kept walking and kept enjoying the trail, they would probably be there already. So let's talk about gear. At this point, you probably don't want to dive in and spend a ton of money on gear just yet, and that's good. We will have a few episodes coming up that cover the very nitty-gritty details of different pieces of gear that you're going to want to bring, from your sleep system to your shelters to your footwear to your electronics and luxury items that you may want to bring. But what you can start doing right now is looking into what other people brought on their hikes and seeing what worked for them, or maybe they did reviews and what didn't work for them, and kind of taking notes and seeing, maybe this is something that you would enjoy having, or maybe this is something that would keep you comfortable when you're out there. Just one thing to be sure of is make sure you're looking at someone's gear list that hiked not only the same trail you're hiking, but also maybe started around the same time that you're hiking. Say if you're hiking the Pacific Crest Trail, if you're starting in March, you're going to need way different gear than someone who is starting in late April or even in May. So things can change pretty quickly, and that is just one little thing to kind of pay attention to. Fortunately, we all have this wonderful resource in the internet, and we can learn from the others that came before us and kind of stand on their shoulders. Personally, this is why I do a gear list video for every trail that I hike, or at least I try to, because I know how valuable that type of information can be. To see what I used and what I got away with, so then you can look at that and learn and maybe use that type of information to change and add to your own gear list. Sorry, my battery just died on the camera and I had to run down a mountain and back up the mountain to get a new battery. So I'm a little bit out of breath. So something else that may influence your gear choices is looking at historical weather data for the area that you're going to be hiking in. This is another great trick that I use before every trail that I hike. You know, if you're hiking the Sheltowee Trace, which is in Kentucky in April, you can look at historical weather data for that area of Kentucky in April and use that information to then pack accordingly. You know, I figured out when I was hiking that trail that it's going to be pretty darn cold, so I wound up buying a much heavier jacket than I normally have. And all of this is very valuable information when it comes to packing for a trip in the woods. Because the last thing you want is to get out there and to realize that it's a lot colder than you thought it would be. Or, oh look, it's been raining for a week, this must be their rainy season. These are the types of things that you can learn before you even go. I also do this type of searching as for how much bugs am I going to see? Is it mosquito season, or am I going to be dealing with a lot of ticks? Now, this type of information isn't as easy to find as historical weather data, but oftentimes it is out there. You know, someone has asked before, and you could even ask yourself in these Facebook groups or asking locals on Instagram what type of conditions you're going to come across. So basically, the point of this episode is that information is power. That you have that power and it's going to aid you in your journey. And this type of power can exponentially increase your chances at being successful and also increase your chances of being comfortable and happy while out on trail. If you can do this type of stuff and you have this type of power now while you're at home, I think why not? Why not look into these types of things, and why not take little notes about this type of stuff? So I encourage you to take some time, watch some videos, and buy some guidebooks, and immerse yourself in the trail you're about to hike. Many don't do this type of research, but I think when you've quit your job and have been dreaming of doing this for years, I personally would want the best possible chances at success. Especially considering most that set out on these types of hikes don't make it the entire way. I will say, however, that there are a lot of people that don't do this that do make it the entire distance, but it certainly makes it a lot harder on them. Just as well, some trails are a lot easier than others and will require a lot less research. How much of this you choose to do is up to you. I personally think the planning is kind of fun, and I like going out there feeling like I already know the place a little bit, but I can see it from both sides. So for now, that concludes today's episode. I hope you found it useful and that it's been a good window into the type of planning that I personally do before a thru hike and the type of planning that goes on. As always, I look forward to seeing you in the next episode of the How to Thru Hike series. We'll be getting into more specifics on gear that you may want and also tips on how you can lighten your backpack. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video.